get a
These are nice. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for coming. We have a lot of work ahead of us today. You'll see that we will be focusing on our decision making. We'll be discussing priorities in the problem sets and how they apply to the public options. We all know that the public options are conceptual, they're not engineered, they're not structural, and they may or may not conform to the standards of highway design and safety. And so we need to make decisions about whether further study is warranted and what should be studied.
I can't hear you, Alice. Do you want to stand?
Okay, you want me to stand?
Yeah, you're talking at the table.
Okay, I'm sorry, I was talking into the tabletop and it wasn't answering, so I'll stand and talk to people who answered. I was just framing this meeting a little bit for you. Here you go. Today we will spend part of the meeting focusing on initial decision making and discussing the priorities and the problem sets and how they apply to the public road options. We all keep in mind that the public road options are conceptual. They're not engineered, they're not structural, and they don't necessarily conform to the standards of highway design and safety. So we need to make decisions on whether further study is warranted and what it is exactly that should be studied. Because the end point is a very specific ask to the full TAM board for funding to study specific constraints of any public options that look viable and acceptable as alternatives to the proposed bill. I would like to turn the meeting. Or is it still me?
Approval of the minutes.
We're going to move now to the approval of the minutes of the meeting of June 10th. Are there any corrections or additions?
I'll move to approve.
Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, any objections?
second.
The meetings are approved. The meeting minutes are approved. Let me back up a minute and ask the working group to please, starting to my right with Tom, introduce themselves.
I'm Tom McInerney. I'm on the Town Council in San Anselmo, and I'm one of the Ross Valley representatives.
My name is Brad Marsh. I'm on the City Council in Larkspur.
I'm Diane Steinhauser, the Executive Director of TAM.
I'm Alice Fredericks, council member from Tiburon and chair of the working group.
I'm Carla Condon from Town of Corte Madera, member of the Corte Madera Town Council.
Bob Ravazio, Corte Madera Town Council. I'm John Reed, Fairfax Town Council.
Good afternoon. I'm Vice Mayor Ann Morrison from Larkspur, sitting in for Dan Hummer. I don't know where Dan is. Where's Dan? I know, I miss Dan. Hello, my name is Gina Bartlett, and I serve as the facilitator for the working group. I'm just going to review the agenda briefly, and then we'll get started with the next item on the working group discussion. The primary goals and the outcome of this meeting is to hear some insights from the working group members on the public submittals for the roadway options that came up last time, the presentations. We want to learn from the work group members what they found as insights. The second thing is that we need the working group to identify whatever requests they want to make at the TAM board, because the board meeting is Thursday, so for any follow-up technical work you would like to have done, we need to do that. And then the third thing, which will be the bulk of the meeting, is to have public submittals to go over and learn about the bike and pedestrian options that the public has developed. So to that end, we're going to move through the agenda in that order. We have been notified that several members of the working group have council meetings tonight, so we have to firmly stop at 6:30. We will go as far as we can through the meeting, and if we have to continue next time with the presentations for the bike and pedestrian, we'll just have to do that. But we'll move as expeditiously as possible. Is there any questions or concerns from the working group on the agenda?
Yeah, I wanted to ask the group, to me it seems like we might want to do the request for TAM board after we hear the pedestrian items, just because we may have requests that result from the pedestrian items.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I would like to move item 5 to after item 6B, but I'll leave it to everyone else to comment.
Okay, I think Alice wants to comment.
I think that it's true that it somehow may shape what we want to ask for. But I suggest we go ahead and have this discussion. We're supposed to have it last time. We need to get a little closure on some of the data we have now, and we can always modify our request.
Can we have two discussions then?
Yes.
We do that. So in the second item, we'll also consider other TAM requests for the TAM board later after the meeting? Okay. I mean, after the presentations, excuse me. Okay, great. So I think the first item, we really want to open it up to the working group, and there is the TAM board meeting is Thursday night. And in order for you to have technical support and technical analysis, you have to have the TAM board receive your request and recommendations for the analytical work you want done, so that work can proceed between now and your next meeting. So that's a driver. The other piece is that you, early on in your meetings, you developed a problem set and you've been contemplating, this area and all of the dilemmas and the pros and cons, and then you received all this information and great submittals from the public last time on the roadway alternatives. What we'd like you to spend some time now is hearing from all of you. This is agenda item 4, to hear from you what you would like to see move forward. What would you as a working group move forward, either for further study or as consideration as a preliminary recommendation on the roadway alternatives? So we want to start with that. Okay, I'll go to Tom, and you have the mic. How can we?
The chair would like to make a suggestion that maybe in the first part of this discussion, we focus on either northbound or southbound, and then make preliminary comments about northbound, so that we can end up not confounding both of the sets of information. Does that work?
I think so. I mean, let me just preface this, because I'll address both north and southbound.
That's okay. So as I indicated, I represent the Ross Valley. I was not at the last meeting, unfortunately, but I have read all the material, went over, and I very much appreciate the public's input on this, because the proposals were very detailed. Some, I think, as I went through it, and I've also asked follow-up questions of various people, including staff and others, some appear to have real potential that I think we should study further. Those would include, I think, the Bracken Plan, which is referred to as the Bracken Plan, as well as Marin Deserves Better, particularly the southbound portion of that. And I'd recommend we study that further. And I'll explain. And maybe I'll preface this by going through each one, because like I said, I spent some time looking at each of the proposals. Some of them, I just think that they fall short, and I'm not sure it's worth, at this point, spending a lot of time on them. They may be things that we want to explore later, but based on the limited time window we have, there are a number of the proposals I think have some essentially kind of deal killers that at least impact us pursuing right now. First I'd mention is the new Pfeiffer interchange plan. That's option 2 that was presented by Dwayne Price. That's raising Highway 101 so Pfeiffer can go underneath. That just seems to me, if not impossible, it would be very costly and present just a host of challenges, such as it would require buying rights of ways and potentially buying out various businesses. And I would suggest or propose that we drop that from further consideration at this point. The option 3, the Dave Schoenbrunn plan, which involves closing various ramps. While it seems easy enough, I would think Corte Madera and Larkspur may have some problems with closing those ramps, and would want to know what would happen on their streets once we do, if several ramps are closed. I thought we were trying to relieve traffic on some of the city streets, and I'm concerned that this proposal, at least at this point, without further study, may make things worse. I thought Dave's his transportation demand management plans, though, that were discussed in his proposal, are worth pursuing regardless of what happens. So those were some good things, but I would think overall that at this point we don't pursue that. The Harrison Plan northbound, that's option 4, which would build a brand new multi-purpose bridge over Corte Madera Creek and Drake. I think that'll have major visual and environmental impacts and right-of-way issues too that I mentioned. So I just don't think that that proposal at this point should be studied further. The Harrison Plan southbound, that requires buying a lot of right-of-ways. Businesses would be affected, I think, by it. And it requires a new structure southbound over Corte Madera Creek. Again, with the visual sensitivity of the structure and working in the creek, I just don't think we should pursue that further. Option 6, which is Plan Simple, it seems to have several design issues with that, like short weaving distances. Some of the proposals in that features seem to be pretty good, like the Madera Auxiliary Lane to Tamalpais. But the overall proposal tries to do a lot in a really short distance, and we already have that problem. Too many moves in a short distance. I suggest that we keep the auxiliary lane ideas that were raised in option 6, but don't pursue this one further. The Jakovich southbound proposal, this appears to create backups onto Drake southbound, and I can't support further greater backups onto Drake from a proposal. So that leaves, as I look at it, the options that I think are worth pursuing, or at least studying further. And for southbound, I think, as I mentioned, both the Bracken alternative and the Marin deserves better southbound could be studied further. Northbound, I think we really have 2 options. The Marin deserves better northbound, which is option 5. The main problem, or the main issue, I don't want to say problem necessarily, the main issue is the land bridge. If the land bridge isn't feasible, it means a new bridge over the creek, and I don't think we should pursue that. Now, there's a lot of discussion about this, and I've seen in emails and others that, a number of people think the land bridge is feasible. So I'd like more information on that, and I'd like that examined because that could determine things. The other alternative is the Wernham Half Diamond northbound. That's the one in the draft environmental document. And I think we should take a closer look at it. There were some suggestions for improvement on that one from what was in the environmental documents, particularly from Councilwoman First from Corte Madera, which included landscaping and not doing the large wall, which seemed to me, if some of those are functionable, that we could end up, making some changes, and it might be something we all could agree on, or at least most of us could agree on. So that seemed to be promising. And I'll just say, I have had Supervisor Katie Rice isn't here today. She's on vacation, but we discussed this, and she asked that I share with the group some of her, overall comments, which I believe are consistent with the conclusions I've, outlined here. She wrote to me over the weekend, and she said, for northbound, she asked, is the Marin deserves better land bridge truly feasible? Structurally, per Caltrans, cost, environmental, are there concerns vis-a-vis Caltrans that the design would require some major interchange structure retrofit? And if so, she'd be concerned about studying that further. So those are questions from her. She thought the other northbound solutions that I went over, she was concerned about those that require a new structure over the creek. She just thinks that a new structure would be infeasible for a variety of reasons, design, study, environmental, etc. And she would be wary of proceeding down a path that would develop a new structure. She thought that if the working group and staff believed that no presented alternatives had strong merit towards addressing the Industrial Avenue on-ramp issue, she strongly encouraged us to, again, look at the Wernham Half Diamond solution. and make various changes that, and look at making some of the changes that were discussed by Diane First and others. For southbound, she thought that, again, like I said, that the Bracken and the Marin Deserves Better solution seemed to have the most potential. And there were some areas that she wanted to study further about potential backup on 101, whether the existing structure that's there can handle the anticipated, load, lane-wise, seismically, et cetera. So that was something else she wants to look at. And then for the pedestrian overcrossing, specifically, is there space in an area around the pedestrian overcrossing to accommodate the lane configurations proposed by both the Bracken and the Marin Deserves Better proposals? So, sorry for being a bit long-winded, but I wanted to go through it, and I wrote these out. And I do appreciate everyone, the public's input, because as I noted, I think some are worthy of pursuing, and frankly, I think at this point, some we can kind of move on and focus on just a few.
Great, thank you so much. Should we start with the southbound? Feedback on the southbound proposals? Brad, you look like you're ready to say something.
I can talk about southbound. I think I took a little bit of a different approach. I mean, in my head, what we're studying are just ideas. And so for southbound, the two ideas that I thought were on the top of my list to figure out, because it wasn't clear to me what the answers were at the last meeting, are on the southbound Sir Francis Drake on-ramp, how many lanes that can support, the current structure, and also what's feasible for additional capacity on that. And the other item that I was interested in was the loop concept from Marin Deserves Better, and whether that was feasible. I don't think we had really good answers on that either last time.
Okay. Other feedbacks on the proposal. You want to concentrate on southbound?
I just want to say, I want to talk a little bit about the process of making the decision. I came out actually where Tom did, and Brad's concerns are not much different. They're just a little more focused. I know we've gotten a lot of feedback on how we should make these decisions. We should make lists and score things 1, 2, 3, 4. But actually, in something as complicated as a highway project, when the context and priorities change of what you're going to fix and how you're going to do it from one option to another, your scoring as you go linearly through a project can change as you try to score other parts of the project. So I really didn't find listing them 1, 2, 3 a very effective way to make the decision. Nevertheless, I really came out where Tom did, that there are aspects of the Marin Deserves Better project and of Bracken's proposal. In the others, there were things that were just deal killers, so it just really didn't matter what the scores were on the rest of them.
Well, I'm happy to say that so far we have consensus. I do also want to express my appreciation to all those that worked unbelievably hard on this project. And I mean, this is done on a volunteer basis. And we got all professional results, professional proposals. I agree with the members of the working group that have already spoken, that I felt that the Marin Deserves Better proposal was very complete, that it addressed a lot of the aspects of the problems that we've had to date. I really liked the Bracken plan and felt that that could be integrated into kind of a cut and paste and integrated into the Marin Deserves Better. The one thing that I felt with the Bracken plan was that it significantly reduced the opportunity for backup onto 101 because it was expanding the ramp from 1 lane to, at some points, 3. So there's no way that that could exacerbate backup because you're adding more opportunity. on that ramp. So I thought it was really a terrific idea. I felt that, or I considered, yes, perhaps there is concern about the cost, about the structural aspects. But when we're looking at the original build plan that had been considered in the past, I would think that this would entail far less finances than what was originally introduced. All in all, I felt that if we could combine the Marin Deserves Better and the Bracken plan, that we really have a winner, and that it becomes better than the no-build and better than the build plan. And so I was really thrilled with it, and I think that we're going to get results that address future increases in traffic where the build plan didn't. It was just addressing the way we have things current. So the new proposals really address the traffic conditions to the future, and I would support those two.
Thanks. Any other working group members want to comment on what merits further study or further moving forward?
Yes, this is getting scary. I agree. We're getting consensus here, appears to be anyway. I just want to echo what Carla said, and I didn't even talk to you about this before the meeting. But I think the Bracken plan is brilliant in its simplicity. I think the Marin Deserves Better plan is, I love the fact that it is ambitious and it really attempts to solve the backups on Sir Francis Drake. And whether it's feasible or not, I think we need to figure out, because I think it truly addresses the core problem for a lot of this. And I don't want to belabor the point, but thank you to everybody who contributed their time and energy to this, because there was an amazing amount of work presented at that meeting a couple of weeks ago. So thank all of you.
Thank you.
Yeah, talk about a lot of work. It's true. I mean, I don't want to also belabor that. I think everybody so far is on the same page. I also agree. I like Bracken plan is increases in capacity. The Marin Deserves Better plan has a lot of features that are interesting. I particularly like how it's focused on safe and separate. That pushes that concept in terms of bicycles and pedestrians, because there's a lot of crossing points that, getting a lot of kids and a lot of people from one side of the freeway to the other. The loop is an interesting concept, and especially if we can also look at the way that pedestrians can possibly get from one of those bus paths to another, then it becomes more of a bus station also. I know that's not included in that plan, but and it would probably make it fairly expensive and not ADA accessible. But also, something that was interesting in here was this pedestrian overcrossing concept between the two malls. I mean, that could be something that might be approached by I don't know if we have dance partners.
Thank you.
Okay, I too like this working group, very good. I also want to thank all of you for doing all the hard efforts and hours you put into the projects. And I'm going to agree with the Marin Deserves Better and the Bracken plan.
I'm going to take a slightly different tack, but I will start by sort of applauding the community input. I think it's gotten us a long ways with considerations that hadn't previously been perhaps developed or even contemplated. So I do give credit to the community for the work that's been done. And if I had to fall back, I too, after reviewing Bracken and Marin Deserves Better, think a lot of components of those two in particular, and perhaps some features of the others as well, deserve merit. My slight problem is I'm not a traffic engineer. I said that from day one. I don't think any of us sitting up here are, and so I'm a little bit concerned about drawing conclusions, quite frankly, on matters that I'm not particularly well versed in. And I'll give you an example. A comment was made with regard to cost. I don't think we have a clue what it is we're talking cost-wise. Another feature of the Marin Deserves Better imaginative was a loop, and I think that Caltrans at the last meeting said well, bring in an 18-wheeler and see how that works. So as a non-traffic engineer, I'm saying to myself, there may be some other features that are perhaps even less obvious than the 18-wheeler concept, but nevertheless could have a significant impact on the acceptability of some of the features. So my approach might be a little bit different, which would be to say to those that are truly versed in these areas, traffic engineers and others, here are some ideas that have been generated from the community. Review those, pull out the best features, modify the existing. I think there's consensus that we would exclude the overpass or the flyover. I think there's universally acceptance of that being not the greatest idea and something we don't want to see included. Speaking for myself anyway, that's where I'm at. But I would be interested in having the engineers, somebody that knows what they're doing, taking first pass and incorporate coming back with what they see are the doable and certainly feasible aspects of the contribution by the community. So that would be my first preference, rather than myself going marching through this, which I've done, but I've always questioned the results of that. So my suggestion would be let's give the materials to those who know. And quite frankly, we have seven possibilities. Who's to say there aren't 8 or 9 or 10 that we haven't considered? I don't know that. So I'm a little bit skeptical of limiting to 7 and going through point by point saying let's accept the Bracken plan.
So you're saying that you would like to see staff look at the whole suite of public submittals and draw out the elements that would be feasible?
That's what I'm saying. I mean, I'm saying they may see features in some of the others that have been discarded almost by consensus that might have merit that you or I'll speak for myself, might not recognize because of my lack of knowledge in the area.
Other thoughts about that piece?
Should I go to Tom? Yeah, go to Tom, please.
Two things I'd add, and maybe part of this is my fault because I think I got us off on this, where I identified the 2 that I thought deserved further study, and I just want to make sure we're clear. I'm not saying, yes, let's go forward with the Bracken and the Marin deserves better. I'd want to get further. I think there's things that merit further analysis, and I too would like to know what the engineers, and particularly the traffic engineers, would say. Particularly, I wouldn't want to proceed with something that's going to, make matters worse on Sir Francis Drake. The other thing is, I think we got off track somewhat in that I brought up the northbound piece, and I don't think there was really any further discussion among us as we went down the line. And I did, like I said, as I looked at it, there were 2, I thought, viable potential options. One was the Marin deserves better, and the issue with that one is whether or not you need a land bridge or whether that's feasible. And I don't know if there's an answer to that, or I'd like to know a little bit more, at least hear from staff on the feasibility of that. And if it's not feasible, and I think, as I said, Supervisor Rice would agree with this, I think the Wernham Half Diamond northbound, that's in the environmental documents, with proposed changes that Diane First and I think others made, I think is really the one that can get the most consensus. And since it was already part of the proposal before, I think at least it's been studied pretty exhaustively, and my hope is we can get consensus on that.
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I don't think that that what I was saying is that I want to necessarily pursue one plan or the other. My view is that the components on the southbound that I thought were worth more study, that there weren't answers for last meeting, consisted of how far can we extend that on-ramp from Sir Francis Drake onto 101, and is this loop feasible? Those items seem to be, a lot of the other stuff's already been studied, and so when I think about this, I don't even know if those are the best ideas, but it would be nice to know the capacity of those lanes so we can figure out how to handle it. And then I think in the end, we're going to have to sit down and say, all right, well, if that's 3 lanes, here are the options down the road, and kind of go through it that way. I don't think we're sitting here making a decision, I think, on what to request from TAM Board for funding. And I wouldn't want to request more than I thought we needed because, this project has already been quite expensive. And so as I read, it has the bill for this group. And so I'm trying to conserve and just pick the spots where I think the study has to be.
And I was going to suggest that perhaps Gary is onto something where we might actually ask for staff input on what parts of the options are feasible and what should be studied. I mean, we all have some idea, but somebody needs to collect the information with an eye to engineering and reality.
I can see the merits in that, but the one concern I have, and I think it might be similar to Brad's, is that if we have the consultants looking over all the details, we're just going to ring up more charges, and that's something that I wanted to bring up later on in the meeting. And so although I would really like to do that, I don't know how that is going to be viewed and how the budget will accommodate such a thing.
So can I come back to you and see what your thoughts are? It sounds like the idea is in the near term to focus on these questions, not eliminating the others completely, but seeing for the next round of inquiry whether or not these bear fruit or are feasible.
Well, I'm not, we've already spent $248,000. I'm not too keen on, doubling that, which we're probably talking about, quite frankly. But to do this right, and if you draw the conclusion, I'll draw my own conclusion, I'm not qualified necessarily. I have personal preference, or I imagine that some of these things can be set aside and some should be further incorporated. I just don't think that I, and quite frankly, with all due respect to this committee, are trained to make those kinds of critical decisions. But what we have generated is a lot of good ideas, and my suspicion is that a trained engineer could go through those pretty quickly and say, this might work, this won't work. I suspect in each of our professions we could go through a draft prepared by, quote, amateurs and determine what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. And then further explore the new ideas or those that might make sense. I'm not sure it would expand it. I just think it would end up with a better product that reflects community involvement and something that technically would hold together.
Can we ask staff right now what they would recommend to move forward for further study? Because I know they've been spending time thinking somewhat.
Sure. Absolutely.
Thanks.
Thank you. So we've had these 7 proposed roadway options for several weeks now, a month actually. We poured through them. We gave you an initial assessment at the last meeting on June 10th. The conclusion that we drew is very similar to what you're hearing from the committee members. There may be features or phases of the Marin Deserves Better and the Dave Bracken alternative that could be built and solve part of the problem. The other alternatives have significant challenges, and we would not recommend that we evaluate them in any detail any further. There are features of those other alternatives, whether it's an auxiliary lane or doing some TDM work, that it may be good to incorporate into the final set of scope elements, but I could support, my team could support, looking at Marin Deserves Better and the Bracken alternative. There are a number of unknowns, not least of which is what Brad mentioned. How much can the structure hold over the creek? Can we squeeze the lanes in to save the pedestrian overcrossing? I know that was part of the conscious design effort of the group. I think we need to take a closer look at that and see if that's possible. As well as environmental impacts of a new structure. Will it work traffic-wise? Basically, what these 2 alternatives have in common is you're exiting all the Fight for Lucky traffic onto Drake. So what happens at the signal on Drake on 101 on the Drake traffic going east-west. Those are some of the things I think we'd have to look at. We could start with that and phase our evaluation to look at that, to look at the structure and its capacity to take 1 lane or 2 lanes. That may shape how we go forward. I don't know if this group would want to recommend a new major structure over the creek. If the answer is we can only take 1 lane, but the desire is to take 2, then we got to rebuild the structure. So it's got a seismic capacity and a loading capacity. So we have to look at that. We have some ideas there. We need to study that a little further. But I could support the group's recommendation, but obviously we're going to have to spend a little money looking into this further.
Go ahead, Alex.
So I have a question of staff, which is just how much specificity on the features of the Bracken and Marin Deserves Better projects do you need from us as suggestions of what to study?
Do you want to hear back to her?
She listening right here.
We actually came up with a list. I don't know if you want to talk about this now. It seems like you wanted to talk more about northbound, at least that was teed up by one of the members here. So we can get into a rough cost estimate of what we think it would take. We have a list of 20-some aspects to this.
But I think she was asking, are there more specificity on the features that you want to know from the group, or is this sort of overarching the kinds of concerns that have been outlined? Does that give you enough direction as staff?
Oh, that gives enough direction. Okay. I mean, you know, this, we brought up a number of issues associated with the initial assessment, as well as advantages. So we flushed those out further in terms of what we exactly know and what we don't know. Okay. So we have a list of what we would have to study.
Okay, I think Brad wants to get in.
Yeah, I just have a quick
I'll
question.
come back to you.
Would it be helpful at all for staff or this group to specify whether or not, when we're looking at the southbound options, we want, these new ones, whether we want to exclude or include the flyover? Would that be helpful to staff?
We have public alternatives that have been proposed. You're talking about those you find that have merit. We could not make a recommendation back to you on whether they work or not unless additional work is done on them. They were conceptual. They were not engineering specific, traffic right-of-way, limit line type documents. So we need to do a little more work on them. It's not a lot. We know a lot already. So it's pretty cost effective because we've studied a lot of this already in the corridor. The TAM board will have to consider at some point, based on the results of that analysis and this group's recommendation, whether to adopt one of those or to go back and look at the project in the draft environmental document. So I obviously can't answer that today.
I just want to clarify my question.
Okay,
just so I'm clear.
And then I'll
Yeah.
come back to you and I'll come down.
My question is really, would it conserve staff resources if we were to ask that these new options were looked at without the possibility of a flyover? In other words, you have to study it like multiple different ways for these on-ramps if there is a flyover versus if there isn't. And I think maybe we can conserve some resources right now.
But these are all,
You know, we've been debating this very question. If we have to build a new structure over the creek, does this group support that? If there is a new on-ramp under the Bracken alternative that rises up from Pfeiffer and meets Warnham and then drops down back to the freeway, will this group support that? So we're unclear what structural features this group will support. And we can bring some detail back on that for further discussion.
Do you want to comment on that? And then
I'll let the others, I think I asked my question.
Okay.
So I'm still unclear about whether you have enough direction to actually take a request to TAM for funding on the northbound option.
We didn't talk about northbound yet, right? We're just doing southbound right now.
Excuse me, southbound.
Okay.
Yes.
I think she said yes, but I wanted to go back to Mayor Phillips. So Mayor Phillips, with this new clarification, does that change your proposal to what the staff would pursue?
No, I think it's right on. I think it incorporates the point I was trying to make earlier. I think, though, that based on the kickback with regard to the flyover, it's sort of disingenuous to even suggest that we would be in favor of such a construction. And that's where this thing started. So I, for one, again, I'm a traffic engineer, so I don't know what the impact is, but just on the surface, I'll say I would not be in favor of spending a lot of money trying to figure out whether or not the flyover works. We've already said, let's not do that. Having said that, and shifting gears a little bit, this is going to result in configuration that will have impact on traffic congestion and safety over southbound. In my way of thinking, there is an altogether different approach. And it's not novel, but nevertheless not on the board, and that is considering funding SMART from San Rafael to Larkspur and using roughly $40 million of the funds we're talking about in that way and looking for more efficient, economical ways of addressing congestion and perhaps safety. Because I frankly think we get a bigger bang for our buck from a transportation congestion standpoint, overall benefit to the community to extend SMART rather than spend $40-some million in the way some of the ways I've seen on the table. I'll just throw that out.
Yes, I just, this is an issue that has sort of been discussed among us, and I thought actually was going to be discussed by the full TAM board, which is probably a venue for it. But I would like to ask staff to add a little clarification about the fungibility of funds.
Thank you, I think. You've been reading about this land use regional transportation plan process. Maybe some of you have attended the workshops. So MTC and ABAG are about ready to adopt a long-range regional transportation and land use plan called Plan Bay Area. They're going to do that in July, which is right around the corner. At least they're proposing to do it in July. It seems like it's on track. There will be some changes, and I have staff and contacts if any of you want to dig into that in any more detail. That's not why we're here. But in that plan, they fund the Greenbrae Corridor Improvement Project as committed project because it was spelled out in legislation in the Regional Measure 2. I think Patrick handed that out at one point at the meeting. And those are committed funds. That's $48 million in committed funds for Greenbrae. They also fund the SMART extension to Larkspur. They use discretionary funds. Now, what does that mean? That means some future fund source, and there's a variety that are on the horizon, will be used to fund the SMART extension to Larkspur. The biggest caution I have with the suggestion of taking the Greenbrae funds and putting them in Larkspur is this plan funds projects. It doesn't give us the money to decide what to do with it. If you take the Greenbrae money and use it to fund SMART, great, then we get SMART. But you don't get anything back to do any improvements in Greenbrae. That's it. You've just solved MTC's problem for them by using committed funds to do the SMART extension. That's not a terrible thing for the TAM board to consider. Maybe that's what they want to do. But right now in this RTP that's going to be adopted, you get both. You get the improvements in Greenbrae and you get the SMART extension. So I don't really know if the best decision is to give one up.
So I want to focus the work group because we have a lot of proposals to get to. So the question that I was framing for you is what you want staff to move forward on with regards to better understanding the options. And I think that where we are on the southbound is what, based on all of the work groups with the exception of Mayor Phillips to a certain extent, and the staff recommendation is to go further on the Marin Deserves Better and the Bracken with special attention to traffic on Sir Francis Drake, the point of the pedestrian overcrossing, and some of these, the loop, some of these other nuances that weren't so clear. how feasible they were. So is there anyone that has a problem on the southbound with those moving forward for the next phase of study?
I just want to make the one comment, and I know it's redundant, but I think it's important to get on the record, is that I would not support putting any more funds at all towards investigating the flyover. That's the whole catalyst of why we're here. It's the whole reason we're going through this process. I don't want to see another nickel spent on that.
Okay, any other comments on the flyover piece? Yeah, to Brad.
No, I'm talking about the original plan bill flyover, not the Bracken flyover.
Okay, the original bill plan flyover.
Yeah.
I think Brad wants to get in on that. Alice, do you mind passing that?
That was kind of what my question was going towards. I don't want to spend any money on studying these options with the flyover. I want them to be studied without the flyover. These two, the southbounds.
Okay. So what about the Bracken? Go ahead, Diane.
The Bracken alternative has a new structure. It's an on-ramp from Pfeiffer that goes over Warnham and drops back down on 101. We would look at the feasibility of that under your current proposal unless the group directs otherwise. I also want to caution that we are trying to determine how many lanes we can put on the structure of the creek. And if that structure needs widening or replacing, we would come back and report that to the group. And you could make a decision at that time on that structure being different than what's there now.
So Brad, back to you. Can you clarify?
I'm not an engineer. I don't know how long the roads need to be fixed before they get to a flyover, and how it's going to get looked at. I don't understand all that. But all I'm saying is that, the group has spent a lot of money, this project has spent a lot of money. And I hear from our group, although we've never taken a position, that people don't want the flyover. So, I don't count a little extension on the side of a bridge as a flyover. I'm talking about the flyover.
Okay, the bill flyover.
Yeah, that's
okay.
That's what I'm talking about. And so,
great.
That's
all
all
I
I'm
wanted to
saying.
confirm. I wanted to confirm. And I see everyone's head shaking. So is anyone want more study done on the bill flyover? So otherwise I'm going to keep moving. Okay, nobody's raising their hand. We're going to go. Okay, so this is the proposal on the southbound, is that the staff do further work on this to report and inform your thinking for moving toward a recommendation. On the northbound, what was proposed is to look at, Marin deserves better, at the feasibility of a land bridge, and then look at the half diamond at Warnham, which with the improvements from the existing environmental document to include the landscaping without the wall, that kind of thing. Is there anyone that has any concerns or any improvements on what's being proposed for further study on the northbound?
I just want to make sure that we can revisit that after we talk about the pedestrian options later today.
Okay. Great. All right. Go ahead, Alice.
I actually have one more southbound question for staff. I think in some of these options that we were talking about covering, there's a question of issues that Corte Madera and Larkspur have expressed opinions about in the past. Will we need to get a resolution of support from these cities in order to go forward, and where does that process start?
When we come back with further analysis, we'd be glad to talk more about that.
Okay, so I'm going to turn it to Alice for item 5 on the request for the TAM board, because we need to formalize the request for the board meeting, recognizing that at the end of the meeting we may revisit this, in particular on the northbound after we hear the pedestrian and bike. But Alice, do you want to go ahead and take over for this piece?
I believe this is an action item.
It is action.
And so basically, I would like authority from the working group to take the request to TAM for funding for further studies in the parameters that we've discussed here today and seem to have reached a consensus on.
So moved.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Any objections?
I just have an inquiry.
Yes.
How much are we talking?
He will. How much is he talking about?
We have an estimate of what it would cost to study the Marin Deserves Better and Bracken Alternative in a little more detail. The Marin Deserves Better northbound land bridge option and changes to the northbound half diamond. And it's several $100,000.
700?
Several.
Several was the same.
Now, what we can do is we can look at how to phase this so that specific features that may be unacceptable, such as a new bridge, we don't go any further until we come back to the group and check in. So we'll try and minimize this to a phased approach.
Can I have a discussion on that? Recently, the IJ came out with an article that so far $248,000 has been spent on our working group procedure. This was over 6 meetings. And I'd even been asked, even by my own kids, gee, how much money you're getting for this? And we're not sitting up here, the 8 of us aren't getting 1 red cent. And so anyway, I was kind of curious too. And so what I would like to ask Diane, in the, if in the near future, and I'll pass this to you, if you could come up with an itemized accounting of what this $248,000 came out of, and not so broad as what was in our, in the board report, but more of a line item, and also question the $20,000 that was invoiced by Fair Peers for the corrected study. Did TAM pay that, or did Fair Peers forgive that?
I don't know. I'd have to get back to you.
Okay, thank you.
And Gary Phillips, I don't know.
Okay, I know there is real concern about how public agencies spend money, but let me tell you, when you're working with a complicated highway project, and it's about the safety of the public and their ability to get where they need to go to do their business, and really about the safety, you want to get professional opinions, and no highway engineer really is going to do this kind of an analysis unless you pay him.
I think Will Phillips wanted to speak.
It's good they took it away from me.
I know, one mic.
I guess I think that that's a considerable amount of money, and I recognize, Alice, your point. Certainly, there's sort of I agree, and my point too. We need certainly some professional advice to make sure we're in the right place. But quite frankly, I haven't seen the breakdown, but to incorporate the thoughts that are on the board, still at the conceptual level, it strikes me that maybe we need an interim step, which is, okay, professionals, take a look at this, come back to tell us if it's even feasible, and if it is, we might then go to the next step. But if it's not feasible, I'd throw out the loop again, not to pick on the loop, but if it's not feasible, I don't want to spend a huge amount of money making that determination. I think professionals can make a little bit of input that we have, a determination, and certainly not charging another $200,000. And we're going to get $500,000 soon, folks. And quite frankly, we don't have a huge amount in hand. So that's a little bit startling. So I would suggest that we take it in steps. One, have somebody look at it, see whether or not this stuff is doable, feasible, before we go into a full-blown traffic analysis and consequences, et cetera, et cetera.
And how would that be different from what you received last time? Because I think the staff provided you a feasibility
Well, I think we've
level.
I think we've narrowed it down considerably with the comments that have been made, and now it's incorporating those in something that, frankly, if I were a traffic engineer, I could probably look at that. I think that maybe any of us could and say, yeah, that works, that doesn't work, just based on background and experience without spending $200,000 for fine tuning it. I think we need to know what this thing looks like, the flyover, for example. I'm in favor of that, before we spend a whole truckload of money determining the feasibility. If we don't like the outcome, well, then maybe we'll elect not to go to the next step.
Okay, other opinions about allocating resources to do some analyses? Go right through and then I'll come here and then back to Alice.
Yeah, I would concur. I mean, this just seems like a crazy amount of money at this point. There has got to be a more efficient way to do this. I would establish a small budget that is a fraction of this. Say, spend that amount, whatever that amount is that we can all agree on. Work within that budget, tell as much as you can with that budget, bring those people to the meeting and maybe have us ask questions of them so we can, and the public ask questions of them so that we can learn more and actually get answers and have some back and forth as part of that process.
Okay, I think you want to go and then I'll come down here.
Yeah, I mean, I think a whole lot of extra money has been spent on this that didn't necessarily need to in order to come to some of the decisions and the discussion that we've had. And yeah, it's not going to be that accurate, but asking planners to kind of shoot from the hip and give you their ballpark ideas, like, does this make sense or does this not make sense? I know that can be almost conversational and can really help a lot. I think that because we had such detailed information on proposals that were already, turned down over the years, that's where a lot of that reaction over that huge price tag came from, because to basically spend that much for a rehash seemed too much.
And then Alice has been waiting, and Brad, and I'll come back to you.
So I would like to point out that what we're discussing now are really our concerns about being expedient and about being frugal. And I don't think anyone would argue with that. I think what we need to do is just ask the staff to frame the request of the TAM board for future funding, keeping this in mind, keeping in mind Gary's suggestions of just doing an overall weeding before we dig down for the details. And when we conclude this discussion, I certainly would entertain a motion to that effect.
I think I had Brad and then Carla.
Sure.
Well, thank you. I think I agree with most of this, although from my perspective, the on-ramp from Sir Francis Drake onto southbound 101 needs to be fully studied, because I think on some level we need to know how many lanes that can fit and if we can fit the bike ped on all that. So if it turns out that the radius and the loop just is undoable, fine, then we can, obviously someone can cut that off. But I think no matter what, we need to know whether that's feasible. And it seems to me that if this group is so against a bridge over the creek, that we really ought to know whether or not we could add a lane off of on northbound. So I guess, I'm not really sure that, apart from being frugal and thoughtful about how money is spent, that there's much to cut here in terms of corners.
Carla was next, and then Diana, I think will take it in.
Thank you. I agree that I think we should be prudent about the funds. At the same time, I would not like to see the working group blamed that all of a sudden we end up with no project at all because we didn't spend enough money to investigate the proposals that have been given. I do question the money that has been spent so far, particularly in the comments that were made at our last meeting in reviewing those proposals. To me, they were boilerplate, they were verbatim project by project. Some of them didn't even apply to the project that they addressed. And so I think it's really careful that we make choices, or that staff makes choices, that we really get first-class treatment of our requests. I think that that's why we're in the fix we are in right now. But certainly, we don't want to make a mistake. Safety, I agree with Mayor Phillips, is number one. We're all concerned about safety. But I think that it's really very important that this money is spent wisely, and whoever is getting the money is accountable for the money that they're getting.
So back to you, Alice. Do you feel like I'm sorry, Diane, go ahead.
Let me just give you a couple quick examples of what things are likely going to cost. So if we want to widen the southbound off-ramp to Madeira because we're going to terminate an auxiliary lane there. That we're going to have to look at how to widen the freeway approaching Madeira and the ramp because now you're going to direct traffic down to Madeira. So that's $6,000 to study that. Under both options, $2,000 for one and $4,000 for the other. If you want to understand the traffic impacts on Drake by having all this traffic now get off at Drake, 1,000 trips in the morning now going through the light, you're going to have to study the traffic on Drake. That's $10,000. So there's a whole slew of these things. There's what happens to Tamil Vista if you redirect traffic down to Madeira. There's what happens to the connection to San Anselmo if everybody's parked on the freeway trying to get off on Drake because they're going to Larkspur. Plus access to the ferry. You know, how do we widen the freeway over Cal Park Hill? Drive it. Tell me if you think there's room for a lane there. We got to look at that. You want some idea on cost and feasibility. You add all these things up, there's 25 little features here. It's going to cost some money, and we're working on a final budget. But we can phase this in accordance with your direction and minimize the first set of costs to find out information to bring back to you. And that much we can definitely do. Constructability, some environmental quick look-see, what would the environmental impacts be, the engineering and the traffic, it adds up.
Yeah, but you already did Sir Francis Drake, right?
We did some work on Drake, yes.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay, so help me out here. Let's bring this to closure. I'm going back to you.
I would just add, either we're going to have this analyzed professionally or we're not. Okay, so when I say, and others have said, let's look at Rent-A-Zer's better southbound, I want to know from a professional what the impact is on Sir Francis Drake. So, and also, is it feasible to do an overcrossing and to put all the traffic on the current overcrossing, or do we have to expand it? And we need a professional to tell us that. So I'm sorry, it's going to cost some money, but I think we need to spend it. And it sounds like that staff has indicated they're going to look at doing this in a phased approach, which I think makes sense. And let's not reuse things that, studies that have already been done, but we need a professional approach to this, and that means the traffic engineers and the other, construction or engineering expertise that we've had.
No, I was just going to point out that we already have a motion and a second on the table, and we have a slew of presentations that we would really like to look at and thoughtful way ask questions. So if there is no more discussion?
Well, actually there is. I mean, I asked how much this was going to cost.
Wait, I don't think we're going to be
I said I asked specifically what the cost was. We were given an example of one item, $6,000. So therefore I'm assuming there's a complete list. And therefore I'd like to know what the total amount is.
We're still working on the total amount.
Gary, we really, what we're talking about now is how much the request we're going to take to TAM is going to be. And I gather staff does not have the information. Part of that is because they have to assess what information they already have or will be duplicative from one option that they want to study to another. So I don't think we're going to get that answer here, but I think we'll have an opportunity to discuss it thoroughly at the TAM board meeting. Is that acceptable?
I don't want to go back and forth too much on this, but it's quite frankly, it seems like a fairly basic question. If we're going to make a recommendation to the full TAM board, what is that recommendation? Certainly an element of that component is cost. And like I said, if we've got $6,000, it's hard to imagine that we wouldn't have a total. I think it's maybe more than folks might expect. And furthermore, I think it needs to reflect our approach. I mean, are we going to approach this as stage one to see what what it is that's conceivable, what it is that's feasible. And then once we know what's feasible, then we can then go to the analysis of those feasible features. I frankly don't know what it is we're going to do or how much it's going to cost. So therefore, I have a hard time recommending to the TAM board that we move on this. It looks a little irresponsible to me. We've already spent $248, talking about another $250 or so. We better tighten it up a little bit.
Can I observe something?
Yeah.
Which is that I hear a few principles coming out. Frugality is important, but a professional opinion is also necessary to proceed with your work. And the staff have just heard from you today some important direction. And so why don't, maybe the recommendation coming out of this working group should be, staff, you have our direction. Please consider frugality, the need for a professional opinion, and a phased approach to bring that detailed proposal to the TAM board. Because that gives them a few days to put something together based on the direction we've had. And then the TAM board, because the time is really of essence. If you don't go to the TAM board on Thursday, you wait like 5 weeks, to go back to them. So you don't get any of this work started until you're almost finished. So that's just my observation.
And no, that was going to be my observation also, that the staff could not possibly have a complete report today because today is when we decided what we want to focus on. I really do think there'll be ample opportunity to discuss it. I know it'd be nice to go in with a report and the itemized items that we're going to get information on and the cost for each as we make this particular decision. But it's not feasible, and we're running up against a time block in getting through this process. So, once again, we have a motion and a second on the table with, let's call it, amendments to the motion to clarify what we expect of the staff, more direction to the staff. All in favor of taking this ask to the town board, to the TAM board, regarding the southbound direction of the Greenway project, say aye. Aye.
We haven't discussed this. Are we going to
Are we going to northbound next?
Oh, I thought it was all one package.
It's all one package.
Yeah, it's just one package.
All right, we discussed doing northbound. Okay, I'm fine with that.
Can you just repeat what we're voting on too? I want to make sure we understand.
Okay, what we're voting on is this, that we've had a discussion and provided direction to staff about taking a request to the TAM board to fund further studies of the two options that we have achieved consensus on. We've also asked the staff to provide some input on what parts of the options are feasible enough to be studied. So basically, this is a vote to take and ask for funds to the TAM board to study.
What I heard was that you want further analysis of the Marin deserves better and Bracken proposal southbound, and further analysis of the land bridge, the Marin deserves better land bridge, and some tweaking of the half diamond northbound. And we will come back with an estimate of a phased approach as frugal as possible while retaining professional credibility.
Thank you.
So, did I pick up any more ayes after that? How are we doing? Let me ask again. All in favor of taking this request to the TAM board, say aye.
Aye.
Any objections?
I'm going to abstain until I understand clearly what the cost associated with this is, which presumably will be presented on Thursday. And I'll take
Yes. Thank you very much, Gary. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you so much. All right, well now we're going to get into the presentations of the bike and pedestrian options, and the order is Bay Trails, Transportation Alternatives of Marin, Patrick Seibert, Marin Deserves Better, the Bike Coalition, Cindy Winners, and David Chambran. The format is going to be much like we did last time. We'll have 7 to 10 minutes of presentation. Presenters, I'm going to be the bear with the time card, so you please have patience with me. Staff will give a 2 to 4 minute just brief concise feedback for the benefit of the working group. They've asked the working group has asked staff to do this, so we are drawing on their expertise. And then we'll open it up for any working group questions, probably 5 to 15 minutes. Please bear in mind that at 6:30 we have a firm stop, and so if we can't get through everything, which is possible, we will pick up wherever we're at the next meeting, which I believe is in 2 weeks. I'll look at the date. Any questions about that? Okay, so our first presenter is the Bay Trails, and I'm not sure who's Maureen. Okay, great.
You can go anywhere you'd like, whatever's good for you. And I'll time you and I'll do your warning. Sound good?
I think I'll go here so I don't block the screen. Hopefully I won't block it for you either. My name is Maureen Gaffney. I'm with the San Francisco Bay Trail Project. And the Bay Trail is a planned 500-mile trail around the entire San Francisco Bay. It goes through, for cyclists and pedestrians, goes through all 47 cities and 9 Bay Area counties. Vision of the Bay Trail is a pathway that's separated from traffic and as close to the shoreline as possible. 330 miles are complete and are open to the public today, connecting neighborhoods, towns, cities, schools, and transit and jobs. Bay Trail serves an important function as an alternative commute corridor and forms the spine of MTC's regional bike and pedestrian plan. Senate Bill 100 is the founding legislation and mandates that the Bay Trail provide connections to existing park and recreation facilities, create links to existing and proposed transportation facilities, and be planned in such a way as to avoid adverse impacts on environmentally sensitive areas. This is the Bay Trail here in Marin. 38 of 89 miles of the Bay Trail in Marin are complete. And completed segments include those at Hamilton, Las Salinas Valley Sanitary District, McInnes Park, China Camp, San Rafael Shoreline, Remillard Park, the Fort Madera Path, the Tiburon Path, Mill Valley Sausalito Path, and Fort Baker. And many more. The Bay Trail Plan was adopted in 1989, and sometimes the original alignment had to move inland for one reason or another. Existing residential development along the canal in San Rafael. There's a rather large state prison on Torrance Drake there in San Rafael that we're all familiar with, or sensitive habitats near Highway 37. But land use has changed, and the Bay Trail is ever on the lookout for opportunities to move the trail closer to the shoreline. A perfect example of this is just over the county line in Sonoma, where the alignment used to be on Highway 37. When some of that bagged bay land came into public ownership, we were able to move the Bay Trail off of 37, which is obviously a horrible place for a trail, and onto the levees there, and now the public is able to enjoy and see the benefits of wetland restoration. Since the early 21st century, the Bay Trail has been looking for a new alignment in Corte Madera and Larkspur, as the current route is circuitous and not adjacent to the shoreline. In 2004, the Bay Trail and MTC jointly funded a feasibility study and worked in partnership with Larkspur, Corte Madera, County of Marin, the Bridge District, MCPC, Caltrans, BCDC, and members of the public to evaluate options for this. The resulting preferred alignment was a new creek crossing in the trestle footprint and a trail in the railroad right-of-way through the Warnham Curve connecting to the Sandra Marker Trail. You'll see this figure from the study in many of the presentations today, and that's good because it means we're all on the same page. I want to mention there are several terms for this railroad pathway that is common to all of the bike and pedestrian options, because I think it gets a little bit confusing. So when we talk about the Central Marin Ferry Connection Phase 2, we talk about the railroad alignment, the North-South Greenway, and the Bay Trail. We're all talking about this alignment here on the railroad corridor, coming through, connecting east of Francis Drake to Warnham. It is important to note that even several of the roadway options that were presented to you on June 10th included the multi-use path on the railroad corridor. I thought that was interesting. This slide shows the important community connections that will be made by completion of this important piece of non-motorized infrastructure. The new SMART station at Larkspur Landing, the ferry, Corte Madera Creek Trail, Sandra Marker Trail, Cost Plus Shopping Center, Redwood High, and other local schools, the Greenbrae Boardwalk, the Village Shopping Center, my house, the Cal Park Hill Tunnel, San Rafael, Larkspur, and Corte Madera will all be connected with a viable, non-polluting transportation corridor. In fact, this pathway is so awesome it will probably end Wolf River. None of the challenges associated with this pathway are insurmountable. Cost? Think of how much you'll save sans flyovers. Environmental impacts? This pathway can be placed to the west of the existing tracks and need not impede into the marsh. Bay Trail has been actively involved in wetland restoration projects around the bay, including South Bay Salt Ponds, North Bay Salt Ponds, Sonoma Baylands, Sears Point, Hamilton, and many others where public access is designed with sensitive species at the forefront. It is important to note that this area is already in use by folks who have made social trails into sensitive wetland areas, and on several occasions I've despaired to see balls thrown into the marsh for eager dogs to chase. A formalization of the trail and removal of other deleterious uses like abandoned cars, tires, and junk can only be a benefit to the habitat. Next slide. This connection between Sir Francis Drake and Warnham on the railroad corridor is the Bay Trail Project's #1 priority in Marin. TAM has a proven track record of delivering top-notch bicycle pedestrian infrastructure projects, and the biggest ones, Cal Park Hill Tunnel and the newly approved crossing of Sir Francis Drake, connect directly to the proposed path on the railroad alignment. The railroad path addresses the heart of SB 375 and congestion relief in this corridor. Bay Trail has already invested over a decade and $100,000 in grant funding in this area. TAM and others have invested time and resources into this alignment. Time is now. If nothing else, there is clear consensus on this part of the Greenbrae Corridor Interchange project. If we don't do this now, it will only become more expensive later. Thank you so much for taking the time to hear our proposals.
Good afternoon. Bill Whitney, I'm project manager with TAM. And today I will briefly go through our initial assessment, describing the beneficial features, and then also describing a few challenging features that we observed. I'd like to step back a little bit and expand a little more on what Maureen mentioned. In 2004, a study was prepared that looked at various alignments. We're connecting the soon-to-be completed, or it was well planned at that point, the Cal Park Hill Tunnel with the pathways to the south. That report was further advanced in 2007 by TAM, where we looked at those proposed alternatives and assessed some of the costs at that time. What we recognized, the cost far exceeded the amount of funds that we had available, so the TAM board directed us to focus on a phased approach, which we did, and we connected the Cal Park Tunnel project with phase 1 at the top. You can't see it, but we continued south, and then we connected over Corte Madera Creek to the Bay Trail shown there. So I'm pleased to say that we were before the BCDC last week, and we received our final permit for that. So phase 1 Central Marin Ferry connection is moving along very well. You'll hear a lot today was the phase 2, which we looked at when we developed phase 1. And what we wanted to make sure is we did not preclude anything that we're doing in phase 1 with the future crossing of the bridge in this location with phase 2. So we did some preliminary engineering for the phase 2 portion that we have used to make decisions based on phase 1 development. So back to the assessment. What we've observed with the Phase 2 connection is the benefits is it promotes the non-motorized mobility. It also furthers the concept of a north-south greenway. We're very supportive of all of that, obviously. Some challenges that we acknowledge are that the railroad alignment is along the smart railroad right away. So you would have to obtain approval from SMART. The lower portion of the Y is actually in Corte Madera. So you would have to receive approval from the town. The new bridge over Corte Madera Creek would have visual impacts that you'd have to assess as part of your environmental document. We've learned a lot with Phase 1 Central Marin, where we just barely went into the salt marsh, and we've done extensive environmental analysis on that. So this would have to be put under that same scrutiny. You would have to identify an operator of the facility, so who would accept this facility to operate. We had a hard time with the Phase 1 to identify who would be responsible for ownership and then who would be responsible to maintain it. So those are just a few of our observations.
Thanks. Any questions or observations or insights from the working group? You need to get the mic.
First, full disclosure, I have to sit on the SMART board. Having said that, I'm not sure, I just don't know, what the probability of receiving SMART approval might be, at least from your perspective, because frankly, I don't know.
Are you looking for an answer?
Yes.
From Bill?
Yes.
Well, of course, we would have to take it to the full SMART board to make that determination. One of the things that we did with Phase 1 portion is that although SMART does not have plans to extend south over Corte Madera Creek today, they want to preserve their right. They want to preserve their railroad right to cross. And they asked us to look at designing the civil alignment, both horizontal and vertical, that if SMART were to cross, this would be the alignment that they would take. And then we then design Phase 1 around that. We would have to go through that same exercise for Phase 2.
Okay, thank you so much. And we'll go to the second proposal, which is Patrick Seidler, I think is the presenter. Sorry, are you the presenter?
You need to set it up.
So can you set that up so I can play this first? Thank you. My name is Patrick Seidler. I'm the president of Transportation Alternatives for Marin. I also sit on the Marin County Bicycle Coalition Board of Advisors. My street cred is that I grew up in Larkspur, and I went to LCM, and I went to Henry C. Hall, and I went here to Redwood High School, so it's a pleasure to be back here at Redwood. Today I'm going to be talking about the North-South Greenway. And the North-South Greenway is actually a unique project. Of all the projects you've heard about today, as was said by Maureen earlier, it's discussed in 4 of the 7 roadway projects that even mention the area, and roadway projects all agreed the North-South Greenway should be there. In addition, I'm speaking for a lot of the groups that are here today to highlight the completion of the North-South Greenway, the section of the project in the Greenbrae corridor. Okay, the North-South Greenway has actually been around for almost 40 years. It started in 1974 in the Marin County Bicycle Plan as the Redwood Avenue route that went from Sausalito to Nevada. In 1994, the county received a $73,000 federal grant, and it designed the exact detailed route in 1994. Interestingly, since 1994, every city and every jurisdiction this route goes through has adopted the route identified in 1994. Corte Madera, Larkspur, San Rafael, Nevada, the Marin County, the county have all put it in their bicycle pedestrian plans. You've heard about the 2004 plan, the 2007 plan, and it is also in the Metropolitan Transportation Commission plan. Now, it gets even bigger and better. In 2008, Measure Q passed, and the North-South Greenway expanded from Nevada all the way to Cloverdale. When it's completed, it will be 91 miles from the Golden Gate Bridge all the way to Cloverdale. And what you have in the palm of your hands right here is an opportunity of a generation. You have the power, the authority, and the legislative mandate to construct the most critical section of the North-South Greenway. It's going to cross the Corte Madera Creek and go underneath Highway 101. And it's identified in your legislation, your legislative intent to get that done. And so we encourage you to embrace this opportunity. I'm going to embrace this change. Okay, in 2004, as Maureen identified, Larkspur and the Bay Trail came up with several alternative passages. And what you kind of see here, what I want to point out to everybody, Maureen kind of talked a little bit about this is the preferred alternative right here. This is the preferred alternative. Everybody who's ever studied this comes up with the same conclusion. We call that 1B right now, or alternative 2 in the 2007 study that TAM did. This is 1C, which is actually the build plan you have right now. But 1B is where everybody who's looked at this project wants to go, is with the preferred alternative 1B. The first part of the project is going to start this year. And as Bill said, I got to tell you, applause for Bill and for TAM, because they brought this process through a number of years, and this is what's going in. You can't quite see it so well here, but that's the overpass going over Sir Francis Drake Boulevard. And it's going to start construction this year, and it will be completed next year. And we'll be able to get across one of the most difficult problem areas in the county, connecting Cow Park Hill to the ferry terminal, and the ferry terminal to the future SMART station. In 2007, this is the document Bill was referring to here. In 2007, Transportation Authority of Marin did a study, completed a lot of engineering, and answers a lot of questions. So unlike every alternative that you've heard so far, the North-South Greenway alternative already has preliminary engineering on it. The North-South Greenway has numbers on it. The North-South Greenway has been approved by different jurisdictions. And so it is a unique project among the ones you've heard. The second part of the project, when the project comes down, North-South Greenway comes down, let's call it Phase 2, the Central Wind Ferry connection. This is Phase 2 right here. It comes down to the edge of, this is Redwood Highway right here. This is Highway 101. This is Warren right here. And what we're proposing is to put an underpass underneath Redwood Highway. Put an underpass underneath Tamil Vista. Connect to the existing bike path that's already there. You will be able to ride your bicycle from Anderson Drive in San Rafael all the way to Montecito Avenue in Corte Madera without crossing the street. You will connect 60%, 40% of the people in Corte Madera with Larkspur to Corte Madera, so they can get back and forth without having to get an automobile to go to school. Now, underpasses, how realistic are these? Well, there's a couple pictures right there at the bottom of the page that are from Boulder, Colorado. Boulder has 79 grade separated crossings, and most of them cost less than $1 million to build, and half of them are next to water, and half of them are below water. Davis, California has 90 grade separated crossings. And by the way, those are the two places in the United States of America that have the highest bicycle pedestrian ridership in the country, at 14% for Boulder and 21% for Davis. Okay, now there's an underpass in Marin County. This is at the top of Porto Suelo Hill. This was put in as part of the HOV gap closure project with the bike path. You can kind of see some of the dimensions there to the right. About 8 foot 6 inches tall, about 14 feet wide, goes up the roadway at about 10 feet. So it gives you an idea of how much space and whether it can be done. This is a great example of an underpass project. It took one of the most dangerous areas in the county and made it the safest area in the county for you to take your kids across. Now, people have come up to me and they've said, Patrick, wait a second. You guys, there's water down there, it's low sea level, and pumping, and what do you do with the water? So what we did? We went to the town of Corte Madera, and we asked them, hey, what do you guys do about water? What's going on? We learned, this is really interesting. Everything in blue right there is pumped in Corte Madera for water. There's 10 pump stations in Corte Madera. Virtually 2/3 of the town is underwater. So they're already pumping 2/3 of their city. And pumping a couple of underpasses is a very small addition to the experts in Marin County in Corte Madera. And Bob will be in charge of that. Now, there are environmental concerns in this area. This is the North-South Greenway, and the Phase 2, the Central Wind Ferry connection, goes through some very sensitive marshland. And there are some great champions out here who are going to make sure we go through the environmental process, and we take care of that. Okay. Interestingly, though, what you find out in this picture here is it's just like what Maureen said, is when you, shows the smart railroad right-of-way right here. That's the smart railroad right-of-way. And interestingly, what's in there? Not some marsh birds. What's in there on the west side is there's a cement plant that's processing with chemicals and a junkyard right here. That's where the bike path would be built. It would be built where the cement plant is and where the junkyard is, according to Darren. What's the real environmental issue? What's the real environmental issue here? It's not the cement plant. It's not the dump car yard. It's about carbon dioxide. If we don't figure a solution out to automobile alternatives, we will not have a future. Our children will not be here. They will not be able to ride their bikes to school because there won't be an atmosphere left. So we have a chance and an opportunity to take this to make it a more environmentally sound future for all of our children, and the North-South Greenway does that. Here's another interesting picture. This shows that all the schools are on the west side of North-South Greenway. The middle school and the high school are both on the North-South Greenway, and the kids cannot get back and forth without riding in a car, without those underpasses along Warner. Here's another interesting one. Look at the Larkspur Ferry Terminal. You build this North-South Greenway, you open up the ferry terminal and the smart station to everybody in the Ross Valley. People that have already decided to get out of their cars can get out a little bit early and ride their bike down. You don't need to build a $25 million parking structure at the Larkspur Ferry Terminal. You need to build the North-South Greenway and Central Wind Ferry Connection Phase 2. Now, here's what you can't get past. And this thing just keeps coming back to me. This project is specifically described in the enabling legislation. In fact, it's the only thing described in the legislation except for the Warnham Interchange. So when you're asking about money and you're allocating time about what to study, we should all be focusing on the North-South Greenway because it's mentioned in the legislation. And here's a couple things right here that are kind of interesting. 26% of the people in the Netherlands ride their bicycles, 25% walk. Look at the United States. 5% ride their bicycles and 3% walk. And here you see the exact opposite. You see the Netherlands has the safest place to ride, the low bars, and on the right side, the United States is the most dangerous country in the world to ride your bike and walk. Why? Because they don't have safe and separate accommodation, which the North-South Greenway provides. So the North-South Greenway is not a good project. The North-South Greenway is not one of the alternatives. The North-South Greenway is the silver bullet. It decreases congestions, improves sustainability, connects the Ross Valley with the transit centers. It's better for health, cleaner environment, it connects communities. The simplest explanation tends to be the right one. Completing the North-South Greenway is Marin's optimal and most cost-effective transportation improvement. And so, so we ask you to prioritize the North-South Greenway and the Greenbrae Corridor project and build the North-South Greenway as a short-term project. Thank you very much.
Nice job. We do share his enthusiasm for non-motorized transportation. And absolutely shares enthusiasm for both the North-South Greenway. He breaks up into two segments, basically, and that's part of the Phase 2, which Maureen discussed, and we'll hear more about the Phase 2, the bridge, the alignment along the railroad right-of-way, and then his undercrossing. I won't repeat the information on the creek crossing, but I will mention one more thing, is that new bridge over the creek is going to require approval from the U.S. Coast Guard, and that's a navigable waterway, and that's a real formidable agency that we did not have to get permission to build the Central Wind Ferry Connection Phase 1. We've been in consultation with them, we understand the requirements, and they do complicate the crossing of the creek. As far as the underpass, we'd like to mention that one of the concerns that we do see with some of the undercrossing components is that it takes eyes off the path. As our David Parisi mentioned, you know, our police officers like to be able to drive by and see people that are using the path. So that's just one comment that we have. And it will require the approval of Caltrans. So you are dealing with a new underpass with the state right away, and so we'll have to get approval from Caltrans and the city and the town, and in fact, the county also was part of the northern segments. We do have concerns about the drainage. Patrick did mention that. That's a real cost. Somebody has to be willing to accept that cost, operate that, and maintain that. So that is a significant hurdle, and we're just like to consider that. Okay.
Working group, any questions or comments?
Thanks. On the undercrossing, Bill, in this, because the undercrossing I think comes up in other proposals, who, under the way things are set up now, who pays for maintenance of an undercrossing? Is that something that the county would pay for entirely? Is that something the cities, Court of Madera and Larkspur are going to have to pay for a significant cost? And if so, I mean, that's something obviously we'll need to discuss, because I would imagine Court of Madera and Larkspur may have some issues about that.
Diane, did you want to say something? You looked at me like you...
Well, the current TAM policy is with a very limited amount of money that we've been able to dredge up to fund 50% of major maintenance. But most of that money is spoken for with the paths that have already been built. So it may be very difficult to, from our recent experience, to convince a local jurisdiction to take over the maintenance of such complex facilities.
Okay, we're going to keep going then. Anything else? Thank you so much, Patrick. We'll go on to the Marin Deserves Better, and I'm not sure who the presenter is.
David McPherson, or Marin Deserves Better, bicycle pedestrian path. Can we go back?
You might want to lift that a little closer to your
Go back
mouth.
to that last slide that showed the undercrossing.
I just closed it. This is the PowerPoint you asked me to give up.
All right, and we'll go with that. The Marin Deserves Better bicycle pedestrian path. Foundation of it is completely consistent with Patrick Seiler's presentation of the North-South Greenway and the undercrossings at the Warnham Gateway. The reason I wanted to bring back that slide for a moment is just to clarify for the public, perhaps anybody on the working group, when we're talking about the undercrossings at Warnham, we're talking about dips of the Sandra Marker pathway that would go under Tamil Vista and would come back to grade. This is not a tunnel, it's not long, it's a very short dip or undercrossing that would be not visual from the road for a very short distance. The estimate is about 60 feet at Tamil Vista, which is from here to the corner of the building. So this is not a long, deep tunnel at Tamil Vista, nor would it be a long, deep tunnel to go under the Redwood Highway. The path would be maintained at grade level under the freeway and would be visible to police, as was one suggestion, and the motor vehicle traffic. And the Marin Deserves Better bicycle pedestrian plan also maintains and improves the existing street crossings, so anyone wishing to bicycle on the street from the Sandra Marker Trail to across Redwood Highway would be able to do so. And likewise, pedestrians, and hopefully with better infrastructure. I'm not going to belabor our 10 additional points that are set forth in our plan from pages 8 to 17, primarily because they're almost identical. It would be duplicative, redundant from what the Marin County Bicycle Coalition is going to present. But obviously, they deal with connectivity, going north and south, east and west, deal with resurfacing projects, Class 2 bike lanes on Tamil Vista, on Redwood Highway South, going towards Nordstrom, and going towards the new Coach School at San Clemente, and at Pfeiffer. And if it's okay with everyone, it might make sense for Mr. Whitley to combine his comments to this portion of the Marin Deserves Bike Plan after the Marin County Bicycle Coalition subdivision presents theirs, in that they're almost the same. Thank you very much.
I'm Eric Bellman, I'm sharing the presentation because Ray deserves better. What I wanted to talk about and re-emphasize was just the enormous amount of support we have for the North-South Greenway with the new bridge crossing and the other crossings at Warren Drive, and re-emphasize 4 of the 7 proposals that were before you the last time. We incorporated this proposal, including the 2 that you pretty much all concluded deserve further merit. The North-South Greenway really needs to be the centerpiece of any proposal that you put forward to the board. I want to talk about the support that it has from the community. If we could go to my first slide. We have the unanimous support of the Tamalpais Union High School District, vote 5-0 in support of the North-South Greenway with this alignment. Is that better? Okay. Next slide. We have the unanimous support of the Larkspur-Corte Madera School District, 5-0 vote in support of the North-South Greenway. Next slide. We have the unanimous support of the Corte Madera Town Council, and I think one of the members was concerned that we may not have the support of the Town Council. We already do. And I will say that in terms of the Larkspur City Council, we hope to bring that before the City Council, and we hope that we'll also have strong support from them. The North-South Greenway needs to be the near-term priority for the Highway 101 Greenway project. It's a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that we have where, as Patrick Seidler pointed out, we have the funding in place that is under Measure 2 that's specifically earmarked for this project. We have overwhelming community support. We have the support of the public. This is the time to do this. If we don't do this now, if we take a different alternative and we go along the freeway or some of the other alternatives that we've proposed, we'll never get back to this, or if we do, it'll cost a lot more money. So in closing, I'd just like to reemphasize, we need to make this the centerpiece of whatever project that is put forward by this panel to the TAM board. This has support. All the others do not have the same unanimity of support as this, and so we'd ask that this be the near-term priority. Thank you.
Thank you.
So as requested by the previous speaker, my comments will be the same for the next speaker, so I'll get them all.
Any comments or questions from the group?
Just one quick one. I've been in a number of the presentations for this, and I just want everybody to know the reason I think this thing received such unanimous support is because one of the main problems we're facing here is traffic congestion, and this is a proposal that actually gets people out of cars and will hopefully help the traffic situation. So just about anybody you talk to is enthusiastic about this from a regional perspective. From a Corte Madera perspective, we are incredibly enthusiastic about this because our town was divided by that highway, and this will unify the west side and the base side of our community, which we're very enthusiastic about. And then from a traffic perspective, we're opening a new school on the base side in 2014. And as with all the communities in Marin, one of our worst traffic times are school times. And I think this proposal has the real opportunity to reduce school traffic because kids are going to want to ride the bike to get to school. You're going to be able to get to Redwood High School from the Bayside a lot faster on a bicycle than you will in a car when this thing's done. No question about it. And that's why the TAM Union Board was so enthusiastic about this. And maintenance does need to be figured out, but I think if we can move forward with something like this, maintenance can be addressed in a way that makes sense for everybody.
Thank you. Anything else?
Okay, thank you so much. Marin deserves better, both of you. Okay, the next one is the Bike Coalition. Andy, I'll let you fully introduce yourself.
Great. Thank you very much, Dina and everybody. Andy Perry from the Marin County Bicycle Coalition. I'm going to stand over here next to my picture. So I wanted to emphasize what Eric just said regarding the support. All of the groups that have come together on this topic of bike ped improvements all have agreement. It's nice to all be in agreement on these projects. I'm going to go through a few projects. Some of them have no controversy whatsoever on them and never have. Some of them are very simple, and I'm going to mention a couple of the ones that have already been mentioned. But first, I just wanted to emphasize the fact that the structures that have been built, the pedestrian overcrossing and others, are about 50 years old. And one of the things we think about a lot at the Marin County Bicycle Coalition isn't next week or next month or the traffic jams of 5 years from now, but the next 75 years and beyond. And we really want to make sure that we're thinking about bike ped improvements that for the next generation and the generation after that and beyond are serving the needs of people so that they can have physical activity and be able to do it in places that are safe. There's another statistic that's really interesting for the near term is the fact that a report just recently came out that for the first time in U.S. history, actually, car driving is actually dipping right now for the first time. Young people are driving less. That is happening at the same time that we're peaking with an obesity epidemic that nationally is costing us about $350 billion a year. So these are some of the solutions, certainly not for the whole country, but will help Marin a lot. So I'm going to point to some of these. I've made these loud colors here so that I can refer to them by color for everybody here. The facility that Maureen and Patrick have already spoken about, I'm not going to spend any time on, is this blue line here going to yellow. This is the Central Mint Ferry Connection Phase 2, very critical piece of the North-South Greenway. Other segments of the North-South Greenway include the Cal Park Tunnel, which opened in 2010, and a project in Mill Valley, the Alto Tunnel, that we one day would like to also see open. And those two projects combined with this will complete the vital pieces of the North-South Greenway. I wanted to also emphasize that Patrick didn't mention this specifically, but if a new off-ramp does come down as part of some of the freeway options, there would, in addition to being an undercrossing here at Redwood Highway, and in addition to the one up at Tamil Vista, there would also need to be some kind of an undercrossing. We would support another undercrossing if there was a freeway off-ramp going northbound off of Highway 101 to Warren. Some of the other features, and again, I want to emphasize to the working group here, if I'm not blocking the image from you, many of the other features I'm going to talk about have already been extensively studied, and some of them are in the current build option that was before us a while back. That includes the southbound on-ramp going on to Highway 101 from Sir Francis Drake Boulevard. That's been looked at, and we do continue to support that being widened. It is currently not wide enough for the man that tried to drive his car going on that bike path going in the wrong direction. Continuing from there, there's the facility that is shown here in orange. That is also in the build document. That is a facility paralleling Highway 101 connecting Warrenham to this facility. Why is there a gap there? Because I didn't draw a line there, but these all connect here. Another piece, and I want to emphasize that overview comment here. All of this has to do with local connectivity in the area. There were a couple of slides showing connection to schools, but there's residents, there's schools, there's shopping areas, and there, of course, is transit over here off the picture that is both SMART and the Larkspur Ferry. Lucky Drive, simple, potentially simple facilities include just paint, bike lanes, just a way to separate the cyclists using that route. As for those of you living in Cordovan area, you might be aware that the High Canal pathway will, over I think the next year, will be connecting Doherty Drive all the way to Tamalpais. You'll actually have a parallel north-south route north of, or in this case, excuse me, west of Tamil Vista, not shown on the map. Other facilities here include Tamil Vista bike lanes, that's in the Mill Valley to Corte Madera corridor study, and old Redwood Highway, and shown in green here. And we have had extensive discussions on how to deal with making that more safe. That is, even though This will be the major north-south connector. There's still a need to have safe passage on Redwood Highway, and we've talked about bike lanes and bike paths there, and there's a number of different good ideas that are on the table there. What else is here? The pedestrian overcrossing, our position on the pedestrian overcrossing is currently that if the footprint of the freeway does not change, then the pedestrian crossing certainly does not need to come down. If the footprint of the freeway does change, requiring the pedestrian overcrossing to come down, the Marin County Bicycle Coalition recommends that a solution be found to maintain that accessibility for local trips. The final piece that's shown here, and this was listed as 1C. 1C. I'm showing this here because this is also something that's been extensively studied. This is part of the build also. This, as Patrick indicated, is the preferred alternative over the creek, but this is listed here because it's been studied and it's something that needs to be considered in the event that that needs to be further considered if this component is not built for whatever reason. If this were built in addition to this or instead of that, we think that it's important to have connectivity to the right-of-way, to the railroad right-of-way. And the reason for that is that there needs to be access for the locals here to get up into this area. And so there is a trailer park here, and there's been some discussions about right-of-way access through that trailer park. I think I've shown all the lines there. So again, the final comments. The issue of maintenance, I realize that that is a concern, and I know that it was a very challenging endeavor to get maintenance agreements for all of the stakeholders for Central Marin Phase 1 over San Francisco Drake Boulevard. I hope that this committee would not have too many reservations about moving forward for the fear of not being able to get maintenance funds. We will do everything we can to get maintenance funds in the future. That is something that we continue to do. There will need to be maintenance agreements for all of these facilities, but we don't not build facilities because we're afraid we might not be able to maintain them. We figure out what we want, we build it, and we find the money. I hope the spirit that is used in order to move forward on this. I think that's all the comments I have on this.
Great.
Yeah. Thank you.
Nice job, Andy. Good summary of the planned area. The TAM board supports the development of a comprehensive non-motorized network plan effort in all of our communities throughout Marin County. So I applaud Marin Deserves Better and the Bicycle Coalition for putting this together. We observed a number of very positive improvements to the various existing paths that we support. We recognize that they've applied some low-cost solutions to improve the safety of the various paths and crossings. Some of the challenging features, as we've mentioned, for the creek crossing, I won't be redundant on that, and the underpass. We do recognize that some of these improvements do range from high to low, so they have to be prioritized. They have to be prioritized within the jurisdiction. So if they're proposed, some of these elements are in the county, some are in Larkspur, some are in Cordillera, then they need the full support of these jurisdictions.
Any observations, insights, or questions from the working group?
Thank you. I appreciate all the effort from all the applicants on this. I think it's really critical that we are able to complete a safe and separate roadway for bikers and pedestrians alike. I am hoping that we can maintain or replace a pedestrian bike overcrossing connecting the east and west sides of town. I would hate to see, after all this time, for us to lose that connectivity. And insofar as maintenance funds go, the Marin Bicycle Coalition will be depending on you guys, because right now I don't know the position of the town, but I would certainly hope that we would be able to get outside funding to support any of this. But I would highly recommend that we do everything we can to keep the safe and separate routes throughout the towns.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thanks, Andy. Now, I think you should go ahead with your pedestrian overcrossing
All right.
presentation. And then we'll have a public comment period at the end if you want to submit, talk then about some other issues. But right now, we'd like you to do your pedestrian overcrossing.
All right.
Thank you.
You going to do the slides?
Sure will. Well, I've already loaded it.
All right. There's another one. Before that.
And Cindy, can you make sure you rock star? You're a
Rock star. I have a soft
right
voice.
into that.
Yes.
Yeah.
No. It's all. Go back to the first one.
Okay, so that's all of them. Is there anything specifically you'd like to concern?
You know what? It's not all mixed up. The first one is the family. That's it. All right. Early this year, I helped gather signatures for the Marin County Bicycle Coalition's petition to keep the pedestrian overcrossing, POC for short. This was not the first time I helped the Bicycle Coalition get signatures for something, but this time I was surprised by the strong emotions expressed by many signers: disbelief, bafflement, indignation, and dismay. They touched my heart, and I began thinking more about the POC, why it is so important, and what can be done. During that time, I started working with Marin Deserves Better, so my views here may differ somewhat from those of my friends in the Bicycle Coalition. My conclusions are the POC must stay exactly where it is and as it is. Adding ramps or building a new one will be impossible or extremely difficult. Next. It's the map.
We might not go to the flying. What's the original? That's the original slide. No, the whole thing.
Do you want to, should we go to the next one while you sort out your slides?
Yes, we should.
Okay.
And he's going to need to.
I know David, Shamra, do you use the slide? Do you have slides?
Not at all.
Oh, great. So why don't we let them sort out the slide presentation and we'll shift to you.
Excellent idea.
Great. Can you pass David the mic though so he can? Thanks, David, for your flexibility.
Sure. So you're probably surprised to see me up on the bike project. I'm not a bike advocate, or for that matter, even a bike user. But I have a very special connection to the trestle, and that means that I have an insight that I wanted to share that could potentially take a project that has received universal support from other proposers and allow it to be built faster and cheaper and with a lot less complication. And the basic concept is to use the existing trestle as it stands right now that's owned by Smart. I said I have a special relationship to this project because I was the person that asked Smart to preserve this right-of-way. And so I have probably a better sense of its potential than anybody that I can think of certainly that's in the public. And it's not something that's gotten a lot of board discussion, at least in the last few years. So what I'm here to present is an idea that would use this right-of-way in the recognition that we're at least a generation away from using this right-of-way for rail purposes. So instead of what I'm proposing that is distinct from all the proposals that you've heard today is I'm not proposing a brand new project. I'm proposing something that uses the resource that's already there, namely these wooden trestles, which had been built to support heavy freight trains, and to use them for a bike path. I've talked to several professionals who strongly suspect that that the existing structure is plenty strong enough to support a bike path. And so, for that reason, I've worked up some implementation elements that could allow this to go forward at minimal cost. I'm not going to take your time to go through all the conditions, etc. But the important part of the project that I'm proposing here is that a decking could be lowered on top of the beams that form the trestle in a prefab fashion that could be very quick to build, and the environmental work needed to approve it might be minimal, given that it's an existing structure. And so what I wanted to suggest is that the area of greatest concern right this moment is how phase 2 would interact with phase 1, because the proposal that I'm suggesting would do slightly different ramp configurations, both to get to the phase 2 from the ground level and from the bridge crossing Sir Francis Drake. And so I've written that up. I've answered what I believe to be a lot of the practical questions. I've identified issues that need to be dealt with in terms of being able to come up with a responsible decision by your agency. And the public policy question that my proposal brings is, here's a proposal that potentially saves a lot of money and gets this built a lot quicker. Is that worth having the uncertainty of when might this ever be needed for rail? And in my mind, that's a public policy question that I think can be resolved. I think it potentially makes a great deal of sense to proceed in this direction to get this built, because I don't see the rail line being used in this next generation, and I feel confident that SMART would agree as well. And so, and one last thing, which is that even if SMART did want to put tracks in, what that would call for would be moving this decking and a new pedestrian bridge over to a new set of supports, which is something that you would build if you were going to build the project that other groups have proposed. So essentially what I'm suggesting is deferring that cost into the very long indefinite future. And so I hope this gives you an idea for a way forward that seriously cuts the cost of the phase 2 proposal that TAM has already seen from its consultants. Thank you.
Thanks, David.
I've spent a few hours out in the field with David understanding this proposal, and we're intrigued by the proposal to use the existing trestle and bridge and foundations that are out there to extend the north-south Greenway. A few of the problems or challenges, I should say, that we've observed that it may eliminate or postpone the possibility for SMART to extend south of the creek. Certainly, as he mentioned, is a public policy decision. You have to obtain approval from the SMART board, of course, as well as the County Court of Madera. We've mentioned the need for maintenance and operation responsibilities to be well defined. One of the things that's common that I haven't mentioned in a lot of these proposals also is we're using the railroad grade to build a pathway, and we need to just address or consider the sea level rise issues that we're all very aware of. One of the challenges that I did observe with David's proposal is we need to make it compatible with the Phase 1 Central Mediterranean Connector that's being finalized today.
One last comment, which is simply that the one sheet that I gave each of you is an updated version of what's in the packet. So this would be the one that would be worth your time. Thank you.
Any observations, insights, or questions from the working group? I'll go to Brad, and I'll come to you.
I just wanted to clarify from Mr. Whitney, I didn't hear you say anything about the structure and whether you thought it could accommodate anything on top of this. Do you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, that was one of my list of issues that we identified, just the need additional assessment. And there's some deteriorated portions of that structure that Dave and I have acknowledged that would seriously need to be looked at. Just the structural capacity, the seismic capacity in the life cycle of the existing structures.
Thank you. I've been out here with David as well. I'm just curious, Coast Guard going to create unsurmountable issue? Coast Guard approval.
I wrote up how to get past that, and there's a clear pathway of buying an option, and if that's successful, then this can go forward.
Right, thanks.
Okay, are we ready, Cindy? Yes. Great. Okay, remember, channel your inner rock star.
All right. I'm going to read this a little bit. You want to go to the AAA map.
Really close. Rockstar means you're going to kind of like eat the microphone.
Sounds German to me. Okay. Number 3.
Let's just put it close to your mouth.
Next one. All right, here we go. The grandfathers of today's engineers wisely built the PLC on the desire line between West Larkspur and the opposite East Larkspur side of the freeway. A desire line is the most direct route for walkers and cyclists where they naturally want to go. The red on the map is the desire line for the PLC. The green is the desire line for Warren. Thinking about what the red line connects, we must see beyond the status quo. We must also foresee the future. Change is coming. Right now along Doherty Drive, adjacent to Home Middle School in Redwood High, Larkspur is building its Rose Lane development, 91 units, and in its center, an expanded new library has cleared initial planning. Along Pfeiffer and Mellon in Port Madera, the Jakovich family intends to redevelop its extensive holdings. On Warner, the new McFarlane Apartments, 185 units, rise by the day. Many of these new residents will walk or cycle to Pfeiffer. Directly across 101 is the Industrial Way area with its dense assortment of industrial, shopping, and affordable housing. The POC is the linchpin that connects these two population nodes. At Larkspur Landing, the city of Larkspur is actively planning higher density, transit-oriented development. Ferry ridership grows fast, SMART will be arriving. All the new residents at Larkspur Landing and all the new transit users will create even more severe traffic congestion in that area. To help relieve it, we must persuade residents there and in nearby communities to walk and cycle for short distance transportation. Negative space refers to the shape of an empty area. Tan zone map of the elongated GSIP corridor is an example. Warren is on the right here, and here's where the POC should be, and the ferry's up there. Motor vehicles notwithstanding, for cyclists and pedestrians, this space, without the overcrossing, would present a real-life void. With the PLC, it's a relatively short walk to Larkspur Landing from Industrial Way along Redwood Highway, then over the creek. If the PLC is removed, pedestrians will have to travel nearly 2/3 farther over the west side of the creek and along the Dog Leg, which heads away from Larkspur Landing, and then double back. Here's the Dog Leg. It is true that cyclists having wheels enjoy an expanded distance horizon compared to walkers. Yes, many cyclists will use Warren and the path north of the creek, but they will also use the PLC as they do now. Pedestrians, however, have only their own 2 feet to move them forward. If walking is to be encouraged, their routes must be convenient, safe, and short. Walkers originating along the Pfeiffer Industrial Desire Line will find it a slog to cross 101 by any route other than the POC. The overcrossing is critical for them. There is no alternative, and if it is removed, walking in this area will suffer a major setback. Now, about the ramps. There's a lot of talk about improving the POC with ADA compliant ramps, even though it's not necessary. The present spirals are grandfathered in, but many believe that if there's a will, the engineers can find a way. I used to believe that too. Then I sat down with maps and measurements. Yes, engineers can build almost anything, but what if we don't like the results? Spirals. That's no, that. Okay. I think we're so used to our POC, which is small by current standards, that we cannot imagine how it would look roughly twice its size. The ramps are 7.5 feet wide. New ones would be 12 feet, the width of a freeway lane. The ramps are 155 feet long. Because the bridge is 20 feet above the roadway and the basic ADA slope is 5%, new ramps must be about 400 feet long. There are 3 kinds of ramp to consider. First, new spirals. Note the support wall to the right. If the ramps are not to intrude into freeway traffic, they must be built totally on the connector street side of the wall. Thus, we get spiral ramps that look like this. They take up almost all of Mellon and almost all of Redwood Highway. The second option is switchbacks. I modeled these on TANF's plans for the first phase of the Central Marin Ferry Connector project. A switchback would leave a bit more space on Mellon, and the street might be widened, but use on Redwood Highway would require taking considerable private property in order to shift the road to the east. Straight ramps may be possible depending on where new freeway lanes are placed, but then we have to be careful what we wish for. I am concerned first about cyclist behavior. ADA ramps are real easy to ride up. This kid. This is the Sandra Marker Trail. But ADA ramps are also real fun to ride down. By building 2 straight ramps with a 20-foot rise close to the arc of the bridge path over the creek, we are creating a roller coaster temptation for some older riders to go at top speed. The tight spiral curves do keep riding speeds low. I'm also concerned that the entry to the straight ramps within 400 feet from the bridgeway will handicap the walkers who need access to the POC at its midpoint. So the spiral should be kept, and then why spend money on adding ramps? Lastly, I'm concerned that new straight ramps or perhaps an entire new POC would create yet another way to Los Angeles-sized Marin. This is the Nimitz Freeway. Perhaps we should worry first about looking like Hayward. In place of ramps, neither Tom Jakovitz nor his son Sebastian could attend today. The family supports keeping the POC in its present configuration. They also believe that should disabled access be advised in the future, then solar-powered lifts would be feasible. They wanted me to tell you that and to ask that Tom's brief written statement be placed in the record, and I'll give that to somebody. In conclusion, we need the POC now. User numbers are up. Bus riders rely on it. Marin deserves better, retains the current bus stops. Why mess with what's working? In the future, we will need the POC even more as population grows in the area and the Roxbury Landing becomes more traffic congested. Though old-fashioned, the overcrossing functions, the narrow bridge serves its purpose. I urge that the POC be left alone and any money that might be spent there be directed to other much-needed bike-ped projects. Perhaps someday a new overcrossing can be built, but that would require a really forward-thinking design concept and much meticulous planning. Keeping the POC will buy us time. I also urge that the multimodal freeway concept of Marin deserves better and Steve Cardellini be further studied. Steve's plan will improve the driving experience and yet preserve our overcrossing. And here I really need to say something about the Bracken plan. I don't know if this is the appropriate spot.
I think it'd be good in the public comment period.
All
Just
right.
wait a couple minutes. Thank you so much. We're really getting close to the wire here.
Thank you, Cindy. I do apologize for our assessment, and I'd be happy to meet with you over the next few days and go over your study more in depth.
Your option.
Okay, well, we'll talk. Okay. We do appreciate the benefits of maintaining the east-west connectivity with the POC. With their proposals, we recognize the changing of the ramps do bring it up to current accessibility standards. Some of the concerns is we do have a little concern about the existing structure useful life. When you touch it, you often have to bring it up to current standards, and so the seismic structural capacity. We do also, I'd like to mention that in the packet tonight, we included our pedestrian overcrossing origin and destination survey. It includes counts over a 7-day period. The conclusions in that report are consistent with the study that we provided to you in 2012.
Okay, any insights or questions or observations on the point of crossing, pedestrian overcrossing? Okay, can we just give a round of applause to all the presenters? We have 6 minutes and we have 2 priority items. One is to go back to, if there's any amendments to the request to the TAM board that Councilmember Marsh requested. And I think the second is to do a public comment period, right? So, is there anything else? I wanted to just see if there's any amendments to the request.
Well, I'd just like to see what the working group thought about studying the existing trestle and/or a structure over the creek as an alternative. I think those might be worth studying.
Structure over the creek.
In place of the trestle.
I can't speak for the rest of the working group, but I don't feel that I'm ready to make any recommendations to ask for study funds from TAM on the pedestrian bike and bus transit plans.
Anyone else have any thoughts or opinions about this?
I think it's definitely worthwhile seeing if this low-cost alternative that David Chesbrough has brought up for reusing that is viable.
The trestle?
Yeah.
I just want to echo that. In fact, I think I heard Bill Whitney use the word intriguing about that concept, which out of Bill, I thought was pretty good.
Positive.
So, I mean, I think we need to explore any and all alternatives to try to get this built. So, I'm with Brad.
Okay. Anybody else?
The one thing that came out to me from Dave's was, or the negative was that, well, there were a couple, but one was that that's controlled by SMART. It would need the approval of the SMART board, that sort of thing. I mean, and I don't have a sense. I'm not on the SMART board, and I don't know if this is even a feasible option. So before I would want to spend money examining something, I'd want to see if it's even feasible. And I don't know what the answer is to that and how we get there.
Yeah, I agree with Tom about that, and also we would need to examine any maintenance issues and who's going to pay for it.
So does anyone know about how to get an answer from the SMART board? Are you on the SMART board, right? Can you give us an answer right now?
Yes.
What was the question again?
I thought that was the answer.
I think the idea has merit. I've been out there with David. I think it has merit. Whether or not the SMART board, one member, whether or not I would approve, I can't say, but it does seem possible.
Point of information, all that it would take is a request to the SMART board. Would you be willing to let us use your right of way?
So is that a possibility to have sort of someone approach the SMART board and then, depending on the answer, go to the next phase of feasibility of the trestle?
We had this discussion with SMART for Central Marine Ferry Connector Phase 1. We spent a lot of time and money assessing the feasibility of protecting the SMART right-of-way while still building our bike facility that's going under construction soon. The Central Marine Ferry Connection Phase 1 preceded the SMART approval in the Corps. It was approved back in 2004. The SMART public funding was approved in 2008. The EIR that same year. So I bring this to your attention because I'm not sure of SMART's capacity or interest, being a two-county board, in really digging into the trestle. They would want us to dig into the trestle and what's the condition, can it be used, and of course, we could come back with an estimate of what that would take. And that's what I'm hearing, is you're interested in perhaps exploring it further.
So should you take that to the TAM board? I'm not sure.
We won't even have an estimate for the TAM board by Thursday.
Excuse me, my proposal is if you simply ask them, would you let us use your trestle if we undertook all the costs and liability? They'll either say yes or no, and then you'll know if you have one of the key ingredients for this.
Yeah, but given their very clear direction on Central Marine Ferry Connection Phase 1, that they want to preserve that right-of-way for a future rail extension, I would imagine they would say the same thing. So we would have to know...
Don't bet on it.
Okay.
I'm suggesting they won't.
Well, if the group wants to propose that as a first step, it's fine with me.
I'm going back to you, put you on the spot.
Fine. I heard 4 people on the group say that they thought it was something that we should at least inquire about. And I'm not sure if that means, an engineering study, that might be too much. But I do think what I heard is that we wanted to find out more about it, and that means engaging the folks at SMART and whatever else the other folks think.
So maybe go engage the folks at SMART, engage the folks at SMART and see if they will say yes or no. They may or may not, and then come back here, report on that.
What they would want to make a decision, or what we need to do.
I think that's cheapest thing we've talked about all day.
Okay, so I see people nodding their head. Are we saying no to that, or are we saying yes?
Yes.
Okay.
No, I do sit on smart board, and so if it would please the chair, I would be glad to have a discussion about that in general terms to see roughly where we're at.
I think everybody wants that. Okay, so you'll follow up with that and then report back, and then we'll go to the next, whether there's another study or what needs to happen with feasibility. Okay, I think then it's 6:31. I know some have to leave for the council meetings, but I'm feeling like we need to go to public comment. The next meeting is in 2 weeks. The location is to be determined. And I think we've gotten great direction from the working group on for the staff to develop a cost proposal focusing on phasing and cost sensitivity to bring to the TAM board on Thursday night so they can bring you more analytical information to inform your decision making, which was one of our major goals. And we heard all the great presentations. So I think with that, I'll turn it to you, Alice, to do the public comment.
All right, I'd like to open the public comment and welcome people to just line up in the podium, and if you can keep your comments to about 3 minutes, that would be so appreciated.
Nancy Redinger from Larkspur. Oh, yeah, let me bring the mic over to you all.
Nancy Redinger from Larkspur. I just want to make sure that when you considered using the trestle as the route for the phase 2 of the Central and Freight Connecting Project, that you recognize that there may be a conflict with the work that's currently planned for phase 1, and I would really, really hate to see phase 1 put on hold while you look at this potential for phase 2.
Madam Chair, I do have to acknowledge that I'm conducting a meeting at 7. I can't be late to this.
Thank you very much.
Alice.
I'm sorry to get over.
They will all get reports on your comments.
Steve Cardellini, Port Madera. I have some information that will shed some light on some of the biggest questions that came up amongst the group when you were discussing the proposed roadway changes as to whether or not there's room to put an extra lane under the POC. The current slow lane is 23.5 feet wide. That's single lane. We're proposing to replace it with two 12-foot lanes. So that means we only push 6 inches into the shoulder. The existing shoulder is 9.5 feet. Then there's a metal barrier, and from the face of the barrier, it's 4 feet to the concrete vertical support for the POC. So if you put in two 12-foot lanes, you'll have a 9-foot shoulder, and that additional 4 feet, so a total of 13 feet from the right edge of the 6th lane to the vertical support for the POC. Then as far as whether or not you can put 4 lanes on the overcrossing after the initial review, one of the other members of Marin Deserves Better and myself went over to the site and we measured the vertical supports that hold the structure that carries that overcrossing over the creek. Then once we had those figures, we went over and compared it to the supports that carry 101 south over the creek. We were very pleased and surprised to find they are identical. The supports that carry the 4 lanes of 101 south and the 8-foot shoulder measure out to be exactly the same, and the spans between them going across the creek are identical. I realize this doesn't address seismic issues at all because we don't have any knowledge in that area. But as far as structure goes, the structure is identical to what's carrying the 4 lanes of the highway. And then as far as the loop goes, I know it's hard to imagine, well, how big is this loop? You can drive this loop or another turn that's the same radius, 75-foot radius. If you go to San Rafael and you get off to go to Bellum, and you turn right on Bellum, right on Anderson under the freeway by the Office Depot, turn right on West Francisco Boulevard, and take that right-hand turn on-ramp. That's a 75-foot radius. So you can drive it and see if you think it's drivable. I did. Thank you.
will be very short. Scott Stokes, plain and simple. I respectfully submit that you consider, which I haven't heard about this evening, consider the importance of a regional transit center, mini transit center in Corte Madera here. Without it, how are you going to handle regional express buses? How are you going to handle the distribution of people to the shopping centers, to the ferry, to the train? Without the mini transit center in plan simple, what are you going to do? If there was one project you wanted to do to help control congestion and control our carbon contribution to the planet, it would be to handle regional express buses that are coming from distant places, not just local transportation. And without a facility that presents itself so clearly in my mind to handle those buses and produce a true contribution to reducing our carbon footprint, is unconscionable. Thank you.
Larry Hall, Larkspur. Standard engineering practice with the anticipation of looking at alternatives in quite a bit of detail, particularly an alternative such as adding lanes across that existing structure. And I would expect that there would be existing information on the ability of that to carry such loads as anticipated here. And also looking at traffic loading impacts on Francis Strait. Perhaps going back to the original studies, if they were thoroughly carried out, would provide a bunch of information that you need. Thank you.
Cindy Winter, Greenbrae. When I first saw the Bracken plan about 6 or 8 weeks ago, I had some serious concerns about a legal concept called governmental design unity. It's quite a specialized concept, but it's similar to an architect building a house and not following accepted building codes. And what the Bracken plan does, he puts a roadway right at the base of the spiral ramps. So cyclists coming down those ramps are going to run into a brick wall or into traffic. And I'm not talking about egregiously speeding cyclists. This is normal cycling behavior based on the physics of the bicycle. So to me, a threshold issue for at least half of the Bracken plan, the northern part of it, is this possible legal liability that would be placed on the city, on the town of Corte Madera, and there would be no immunity. And I think you might have a hard time getting insurance covered for it too. So what I'd like to do is send a memo to everybody, and if there's any one of you who is on good terms with a personal injury attorney, or if there's any such in the room here, I think it would be, you'd be very well advised to have a consultation. That's all.
My name is Rick Coates. I'm the Executive Director of EcoRing, which is a nonprofit organization that promotes ecotourism and eco-travel. As such, we of course promote things like the smart train, bicycle trails, public transit, and so forth. David's idea of preserving that trestle sort of resonates with me. One of the pieces of infrastructure for tourism is history. It is, in fact, a very visible and interesting bit of our history that I think should be preserved. Americans don't seem to be used to doing that very often, but it is really something that brings tourists. And there's no tourist like a trained tourist. they'll go anywhere just to look at an old right-of-way. So I like that idea. Also, I think it's really important to focus on the alternative transportation here. I've been studying climate science since I worked on some instruments, electronic instruments as a chemist and as an electrical engineer that studied the whole of the ozone layer and worked out the chemistry for what was and having watched climate science for a very long time since then, the new numbers coming out of 400 parts per million carbon dioxide just absolutely terrifying to me. This is a really serious issue. We do not need to create more habitat for automobiles. There's far too much already. We need to get people out of the automobiles whenever possible.
Hi, my name is Cheryl Flint, and I live on the Greenbrae Boardwalk. I've lived there for over 30 years, and I actually live in the house that is right next to the train trestle. So I have a couple comments. I'm definitely for connecting the path and pedestrian walkway. I'm not so crazy about the idea of having it go literally in my backyard, which it would be. Especially not on top of the train trestle, which I see that would literally be in my backyard. On the west side, it wouldn't be as terrible. Still, I feel there'd be quite a loss of privacy we spend a lot of time out on our decks, and even when kids walk on the train trestle, it's very obvious they're up there. I can hear them talking, I see them. But another reason is, I hope that at least at the beginning there could be a connectivity. Phase 1, which is great, which is right across from my house. I'll be seeing it across the creek, but that's fine. And that would connect going over the freeway. I ride that quite often. The other thing about the trestle is it is definitely an old wooden structure that is riddled with termites. The majority of us on the boardwalk have had to have our houses treated, and the termites have done a lot of damage to that trestle. And I happened to be outside about a year ago watering, and I heard this sound, and it was a whole section of the trestle that just went and fell into the creek. Literally just fell over. It was so rotten. So my husband went out and tied it up, and we had to call the Coast Guard or somebody, and they came and towed it away because it would have been a terrible hazard for boats and the rowers that go up and down. So I just, want to suggest that there could be a very big problem with trying to put something on top of that trestle, just because it's probably been very compromised by the termites over the years. So just wanted to make that known that could be quite the issue. But also I just wanted to say that for myself in particular and my closest neighbors, we do have a concern about the bicycle pedestrian walkway going so close to our houses and being right above our heads, literally. Thank you.
House, Greenbrae Boardwalk. I wanted to say and support, thank you very much to the Marin County Bicycle Coalition and to Cindy Winter, who spoke so beautifully about local needs. And I think that the regional needs are important, but the local needs are also very important. Many of us have been working for many years in the Redwood Highway North area to try to improve an area which is significantly dangerous. It's an area with seniors and school children and some low-income people, with a thriving industrial area with no sidewalks. So it's really important, I think, that your group move forward on fixing the plans as outlined by MCDC in the Redwood Highway area. And I do think that the bus stops and the pedestrian overcrossing located in the middle of our community are critical where they are. It takes significantly longer to go under Warnham. Our school kids take 20 minutes to walk to Hall now. It takes about 30 minutes to walk under Warnham. Down to downtown Larkspur, it's an extra 14-minute walk under Warnham as compared to the POC. So just a word to the wise, I think I'd like to support what Cindy's saying. The location is very important in the middle of the community. Fixing the ramps, I disagree with her. I think it would be great because there are many women specifically who don't use that because they find the spirals steep and challenging. And if there were a way to design a new overcrossing that was much more accessible to everybody, I think it would be a great benefit to the community and increase the number of users. Likewise, I'd like to see the east side northbound ramp sidewalk, which is very narrow. Pedestrians constantly complain that bikers are not getting off for them. So I would make a high priority to do that first while we talk about the Creek Bridge. Thank you so much.
Hello, Patrick Seidler, again, public comment. You know, thank you again for the opportunity to speak to you for the time, but I just wanted to note that there's two phases to the North-South Greenway project. One you've already done the engineering on, done a lot of work on, that's the TAM studies, 2007, 2010, but from Redwood Highway to the Sandra Marker Trail, I urge the working group to prioritize that as an area to study the feasibility, building improvements that all 6 of those groups are talking about, connecting the Sandra Marker Trail to the Cal Park Hill Tunnel. The other thing I'd urge you to consider is, I know that sometimes cycling pedestrian kind of gets puts off to the end and not everybody's here, is that the improvements that the MCBC and Marin Deserves Better, maybe there's a question on how to advance those or get a price tag on those or something to that effect. But I think there's a lot of really good thought that went into it. Of the people who are up here tonight, others really put a lot of good thought in, and there's some really good solutions. So I urge you to somehow try to advance that. The second thing I want to do is address the comment about from the mayor of San Rafael. It was good to hear him advocate for something for San Rafael. Actually, to disagree with the executive director, there is money specifically in Regional Measure 2 for the improvement from San Rafael to Larkspur. It's specifically defined as $35 million. So that might be something to direct the mayor toward rather than the funds of this project. And so I would, excuse me.
For SMART, right?
For SMART, yeah, for the SMART connection from Lawrenceburg to San Rafael. It's in Regional Measure 230. But what is there is there's still language inside Regional Measure 2 talking about the multi-use path from Lawrenceburg to the San Rafael Transit Center. So I urge the mayor to come back with a recommendation for that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I think that was our final speaker. I think we're adjourned. Unless somebody objects.